Yep, let's begin.
Okay, Assalamu alaikum warahmatullah. So last time we covered what was there in pre-Islamic Arabia, right? So we covered the events that took place in pre-Islamic Arabia, how the culture was like in pre-Islamic Arabia, and also in the Persian, in the neighboring Persian and the Roman empires, right? Before the arrival of the Prophet Muhammad Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam. So that we can give a context as to why the arrival of Prophet Muhammad Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam was such revolutionary. I mean, was why the arrival of Islam on the stage was such, I mean, revolutionized the world at that time, right? And then we stopped at the birth of the Prophet Muhammad. So we stopped just at the birth of the Prophet Muhammad. So in this session we are going to talk about the birth of the Prophet Muhammad and then the early childhood, and then we'll move on to the adulthood, and then the first and the second revelations. So this is the second session. So the birth of the Prophet Muhammad took place on Monday, right? So we don't basically there are not, I mean, the exact date is not known, but it took place on a Monday, and it took place in what we call Amul Field, right? So the Arabs at that time, they didn't had a calendar. So the calendar was constituted during the time of Umar Radhiyallahu anhu. So the Hijri calendar that we know today was constituted during the time of Umar Radhiyallahu anhu, right? So when Islam became a civilization, so it needed its calendar. So Umar Radhiyallahu anhu basically started the Hijri calendar. So before that, the Arabs, since I said, as I just said in the previous lecture, that the Arabs did not had a proper civilization. So what they used to do was they used to mark the years based on events, right? So let's say this particular war happened, right? So this particular war is the year of the war, right? And then 1 year after the war is going to be 1 year after the war. And then 10 years after the war is going to be 10 years after that particular war, right? So they will mark the years based on important events, right? So and Amul Field, as we talked about in the last lecture as well. So when the elephants came, Abraham came with his elephants. So that was very significant event in the history of Arabia. So during that year, Prophet Muhammad was born, right? So if when the historians dated back, so they dated to about 570 CE, right? 570 of the common era, right? And then after the birth of the Prophet Muhammad, basically his mother, as was the tradition in Arabia at that time, that the noble, that children of noble people, right? So they used to give the noble people used to give their children, their newly born children, to a foster mother, right? So we used to live a Bedouin foster mother used to live in the Bedouin environment and not in the city environment, right? So Makkah was a bustling city, so there were many people in Makkah. So they used to give their children to a Bedouin woman who would take care of them for about 2 years, right? And then after 2 years, they would take their children back, right? So this was a custom. And as we discussed, that Muhammad was the grandchild of Abdul Muttalib, right? So Abdul Muttalib was the chieftain of Makkah at that time and was probably the most famous Arab at that time, right? Alongside Hatim Attai. So Abdul Muttalib was probably the most famous Arab at that time. So of course his grandson is going to be given to foster care as well. So this is what Amina, the mother of Prophet Muhammad did. So uh, she gave Muhammad to foster care, and she gave it to Halima Sadia, right? So Halima Sadia was the foster mother of Prophet Muhammad. Right? So the story goes that Halima Sadia, basically there was a drought where she lived, and then she was suffering from poverty. So then she had a baby, so she decided that she's going to go to Makkah and she's going to take the take the rich children. So take one of the rich children, so take one or more rich children, and then she's going to earn money by fostering those rich children, and right. So she's going to earn money in that way. So she, along with few other women from her tribe, and her tribe was Banu Sa'd bin Bakr. So Banu Sa'd bin Bakr was a sub tribe of Hawazin, right? So Hawazin, if you guys remember, Hawazin tribe was one of the tribes of Taif, right? So Taif was the city which Muhammad Sallam went to, right? So later we are going to cover that, right? So Taif was inhabited by two important tribes, those Thaqif and Hawazin, right? So a sub-tribe of Hawazin was Sa'd bin Bakr, right? So it was a Bedouin tribe. So Halima Sadia would belong to that particular tribe. And because they were suffering from poverty, so they decided to go to Makkah and to foster care, to take into their care the children of rich people so that they're going to get paid in that way, right? So Halima Sadia went with a few of the women and also her husband as well. Her husband's name was Hal, right? So she went with her husband and a few of the women. They went to Makkah and they started looking for children, right? So Halima Sadia, when she was looking for children, she could not find, right? So she could not find any children, whereas all of her colleagues, right, all of her friends who were there with her, who belonged to her tribe, they found children to take care of, right? And she couldn't find anyone, right? And people were not going towards Muhammad Sallallahu. Why? Because he was an orphan, right? And therefore the women were like, who is going to pay us, right? So because his father was dead, Abdullah, and Muhammad Sallallahu was an orphan. So therefore the women were reluctant to take Muhammad Sallallahu because they feared that they will not get paid, right? So whereas Halima, when she did not had any child at the end of the search, then she consulted his husband Haris, and then Haris said, "Then why don't you take the orphan child, right? Maybe Allah is going to bless us because of this orphan child, right?" And therefore Halima agreed, and therefore Halima went into Muhammad Sallam, went into Muhammad Sallam, right? And therefore she became the foster mother of Muhammad Sallam from that point onwards, right? So there were a few incidents that happened during Muhammad Sallam's time with Halima Sadiya, right? So the first was that there was an immediate barakah, right? There was uh, when she took Muhammad Sallam, then she could witness that the blessings of Muhammad Sallam were coming onto her family. So let's say she had one camel and a donkey, right? So she had a she camel and a she donkey. She camel was not giving any milk, and that was the reason why she traveled to Makkah, right? Because there was no milk, there was no food, it was very difficult times. So therefore, that she camel started giving milk again, right? That she donkey, which she used to travel on, and her husband used to travel on. So not the she camel. The she camel started giving milk. The she donkey in which she used to ride on, right? That donkey became very lean and very fast, right? So these were some of the blessings. The camel started giving milk, and the family started feeding themselves to the full, right? So it was a very blessed time for Halima and her family, right? And when Muhammad Sallallahu was about 2 years old, it was about time to return Muhammad Sallallahu to his family. So Halima, she witnessed so many blessings. So therefore, she went to Amina, and then she said that Muhammad Sallallahu, basically, she made some excuses that Muhammad Sallallahu is not ready for city environment because it's going to be there are lots of diseases in the city, so he's not ready for that. So just give us a few more years with him, right? And Amina agreed, and therefore Muhammad Sallallahu stayed with Halima till he was about 4 or 5 years old. Okay, and this was the time in which he was cared by Halima, and in which she was taken care of by Halima and her husband, right? And Muhammad Sallam had a few foster brothers and sisters. So these are the names of some of them: right? Abdullah bin Al Harith, Anisa bin Al Harith, and Ashema. So this particular foster sister, she has an interesting story, in the sense that Ashema was the foster sister of Muhammad Sallam, and when Muhammad Sallam became the leader of Medina, and then he conquered Makkah, and then afterwards in the Battle of Hunain, he fought against the Hawazin and the Thaqif tribes, right? So he fought against the main tribe, the main tribe of Banu Sa'd bin Bakr, right? The Hawazin tribe. Right? And when the Muslims defeated when the Muslims won in the Battle of Hunain, right? So Ashema, there was a particular woman who said that she is the foster sister of Muhammad Sallallahu, right? And then that woman was taken to Muhammad Sallallahu, and then Muhammad Sallallahu asked her, what is your proof that you are my foster sister, right? And she said that I still have the bite that you bit me with when you were young, right? And then Muhammad Sallallahu laughed, and then he recognized that it is Shema, and therefore he gave her lots of gifts, right? And therefore Shema was freed at that time, okay? And another one of his foster brothers was Abu Sufyan bin al-Harith bin Abdul Muttalib, right? So this is the cousin of Muhammad Sallallahu, and he has an interesting story as well. So he was a cousin, he was the first cousin. So this al-Harith here is the husband of Halima Sadiya, right? This al-Harith here is not the husband of Halima Sadiya, he is the uncle of Muhammad Sallallahu, right? Ibn Abdul Muttalib, as you can see here. So Abu Sufyan, this is Abu Sufyan, it's not Abu Sufyan, the Umayyad Abu Sufyan. This is not the Abu Sufyan ibn Harb. This is the other Abu Sufyan, who was the cousin of Muhammad Sallallahu, right? And he was also a staunch enemy of Islam. So he was he was the best friend with Muhammad Sallallahu before. He was one of the best friends of Muhammad Sallallahu. He was very close to Muhammad Sallallahu before the revelation. But then after the revelation, he became one of the staunchest opponents. And he was the poet. He used to compete against Hassan bin Thabit, who was the primary poet of Muhammad Sallallahu as well, right? And then he used to write poems against Islam, against Muhammad Sallallahu. And then after the conquest of Makkah, he accepted Islam, right? But then he asked for forgiveness from Prophet Muhammad Sallallahu, but Prophet Muhammad Sallallahu was so hurt that his own cousin was writing against him, was using foul language against him, that he did not accept his apology, right? And he just turned away from him. So Prophet Muhammad Sallallahu did not accept his apology up until the Battle of Hunain, right? Where he proved to be one of the main protectors of Muhammad Sallallahu, and therefore Muhammad accepted his apology, and then he became a Sahabi. And he was already a Sahabi, but then he became a prominent Sahabi, right? And he was already a cousin of Muhammad, so he had a prominent rank among the Sahabi as well. Okay, and then finally Hamza bin Abdul Muttalib. So his story is well known. So we will cover the story later as well. But Hamza bin Abdul Muttalib and Muhammad before Muhammad was given to Halima Sadiya, right? Muhammad uh, was breastfed by a woman who her name was Thueba, right? And that woman also breastfed Hamza bin Abdul Muttalib, right? So Hamza was a foster brother of Muhammad from Thueba, right? And then Thueba later, basically, her name Thueba is peculiar. Maybe lots of people from subcontinent have not heard this name, but the Thueba name became corrupted and became Sobia, right? So Sobia, we have heard the name Sobia. So Sobia is a corrupted version of Thueba, and she was the foster mother of Muhammad as well. Okay, so and then when Muhammad was with Halima and he was about 4 or 5 years old, so this particular incident happened, and this incident basically led Halima to give shook Halima, and then she gave she gave Muhammad back to Amina, right? So this incident was that a man came, right? Angel Jibril came, and when Muhammad was playing with other children, then Angel Jibril came and he overpowered Muhammad. Muhammad was fighting, but he overpowered him, of course, because he was an angel. So then afterwards, he cut his chest open and he took his heart out, right? And then afterwards, he took a clot of blood out of the heart and then he threw it away. And he said that this is the part of Satan, right? This is the share of Satan which I have thrown out, right? And then afterwards, he washed the heart with Zamzam water and then he put it back and then he sewed the chest up back again, right? So this is the incident that took place, and the children that were there who were witnessing it were shocked and they ran back to Halima and they said someone has killed Muhammad, right? And then Halima, then she came back and then she saw that Muhammad was pale, right? And then when she saw that, and then when she heard what was happened, she got basically shook, and then she came to a conclusion that this is the time to return Muhammad back to Amina, right? Because this was a very shocking event for her. She could not comprehend what was happening because, yeah, of course, this was an extraordinary event, and therefore she said that this is the time that we should give this child back to Amina. Okay, and therefore Muhammad returned back to Amina when he was about 4 or 5 years old. Okay. And this is the reference in Muslim, Sahih Muslim, which references this particular incident. So this particular incident of the taking out of the heart of Muhammad Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam, it basically happened on more than one occasion, right? So it happened here, and then it again happened during the time of Isra, which we'll cover later. Right? Isra was the journey from Makkah to Jerusalem, right? So from Baytul Haram to Baytul Maqdis, right? So that journey during that time as well, Jibril took his heart and he washed it with Zamzam as well, and then he placed it back, right? So this is the first time that it happened, and the second time it happened during Isra. Right? And this incident is verified because it is in the Sahih Hadith as well, Sahih Muslim. Right? So this incident is verified, and this incident basically took place. Okay, and it is verified by chain of narrators that are Sahih. Okay, and then there is a verse in the Quran, right? Alam nashrah laka sadrak. You guys might have heard that verse, very famous. So that particular verse, Surah Shah, the first verse of Surah Shah, it translates to, have we not uplifted your heart for your prophet, right? Or have we not opened your heart for your prophet, right? So this particular verse, the scholars say that this verse is basically metaphorical opening of the heart of Muhammad to Islam and to the message of Islam and to the burden of prophethood, right? But some of the scholars have suggested that this also means the physical opening of the heart, which took place when Muhammad was a young boy, and it refers to this particular incident, right? But most of the scholars say that this is metaphorical, but some take it as some take the literal meaning of this particular verse, and then they say that this meaning is this verse refers to the incident that took place during the childhood of Prophet Muhammad. Okay, so after he was returned back to his mother, so there's not many stories that are that we have in the Seerah, simply because there was no one to record them, right? So when he was young, there was no one to record what was going on with his mother and also his family. What were the interactions like? There are no records that are present here, right? So what we know is that Amina died when Muhammad was about 6, right? And the incident goes that let me take it back to Hashim, right? So if you guys remember, I gave the lineage of Muhammad in the previous lecture. I gave the entire lineage of Muhammad and I described why the lineage of Muhammad was the best of lineage. And I described the grandfather of Muhammad Sallallahu was Abdul Muttalib, right? Abdul Muttalib was the grandfather, and then the great grandfather was Hashim, right? And then the great great grandfather was Abmanaf, and then the great 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 grandfather was Qusay. Okay, and then I described how Qusay was also important, how Abmanaf was also important, how Abdul Muttalib, how Hashim was also very important. He established basically Rihlatul Shatai was right? How Abdul Muttalib was also very important, and then so on, right? And then Abdullah and Muhammad Sallallahu, right? That is why the lineage of Muhammad Sallallahu was the best amongst the Arabs, right? And was the best lineage overall. So what what happened was Hashim, as I just said, was a trader, right? He established the Rihlat al-Shatai was basically trading from Yemen, and also the Arabs used to go, the Makkans used to go all the way to Yemen, and they would come back and they would sell the stuff that they would purchase from Yemen on a profit, and that is how they used to make their money, right? And then in the summers they would go to Bosra in the Roman Empire. They would get the stuff from there, sell it on a profit back to Makkah, to all of the Arabs who used to come for pilgrimage during the Hajj season, right? And they would make a profit out of that, and that was their economic lifeline. Right? So they were businessmen. They would travel back and forth from north to south, and they would travel. And they would sell stuff on a profit, and that is how they used to make money. And Hashim, on one of his travels, he met a Yathribi woman, a woman from Yathrib, right, which was the name of Medina before name of Medina before the Prophet Muhammad migrated to Medina. So he met a Yathribi woman, and he had a child with Yathribi woman, and he married her, and he had a child, and the name of the child was Sheba. Okay, and Sheba, he stayed in Yathrib until when he was a young boy. Another caravan from Makkah came, right, and then another caravan from Makkah came, and there was a brother or the cousin of Hashim, right, who saw Sheba, and he recognized that he's not from Medina, right? He's not from Yathrib. So he said that he recognized that he might be the son of Hashim, right? Or he might be from his tribe, right? Because the features they resembled. So he recognized it, and then he told him that he's from a noble tribe, and then he should come to Makkah, right? And then he took him, and then we took the child to him, the Sheba, the name of the child was Sheba. He took Sheba with him, and then he brought him to Makkah from Yathrib. Okay, and the name of that person who was the person who brought Sheba, the cousin or the brother of Hashim, who brought Sheba from Yathrib to Makkah, his name was Muttalib, right? And he brought Sheba. So when he brought Sheba to Makkah, and his name was Muttalib, the people thought that this is the slave that Muttalib has purchased from the market, right? And then they named the child as Abdul Muttalib. Later they found out that he's the son of Hashim, and he's one of their own, right? And therefore, but this particular title stuck with him, Abdul Muttalib. So the relatives of Muhammad Sallallahu from Hashim, right? From Hashim, Abdul Muttalib and onwards were in Medina as well, right? So this is how Allah planned it. This is how Allah planned it, because when Muhammad Sallallahu went to Medina, he was not going to foreign people or altogether foreign people. He already had relatives in Medina, such as Abu Ayyub al-Ansari, who was a relative of Muhammad Sallallahu from Abdul Muttalib, from the mother side of Abdul Muttalib, and that is how the Medina people were easily accepting of Muhammad because he was one of their own, and this is how Allah planned it. So when Abdul Muttalib's son Abdullah, right? So the father of Muhammad, he was also a tradesman, just like his father, just like his grandfather. He was going after he married Amina. A few days after, or a few weeks after, he was going to one of his trade missions, and then on his way back, he fell ill, and then he went to Yathrib again because he had relatives in Yathrib. So he went to Yathrib, and he told his other colleagues that you guys go ahead to Makkah. I'm going to stay in Yathrib because I don't feel well. And then when he went to Yathrib, he died there. Abdullah died there, and his grave was there in Yathrib. So Amina sought to go to Yathrib to visit the grave. When Muhammad was there, he took Muhammad and one of her servants. The servant name was Ayman. And Ayman also has a very interesting story, which I'll discuss later. So Ayman and Muhammad she took Ayman and Muhammad to visit the grave of his husband, of his late deceased husband, Abdullah, right? And when she went to Yathrib, and then on her way back in a place called Al-Abwa, she fell ill and she died. Right? So Muhammad lost his mother and both his father and his mother when he was 6, right? So when he lost his father before he was born, and he lost his mother when he was at the age of 6, right? So he became, his parents, both of his parents were gone by the age of 6. So later, after many years after, Muhammad Sallallahu basically in this hadith, as you can see, this hadith is also Sahih Muslim, so this is a Sahih hadith. So in this particular hadith, Muhammad Sallallahu asked Allah to sought permission from Allah to beg forgiveness for Amina, but Allah refused. Right? So Allah said that this is Allah basically refused because it is His prerogative only because it is His prerogative to judge any person. Right? So He refused, and then afterwards, Muhammad Sallallahu sought to visit the grave of his mother, and this permission was granted by Allah. Right? So before Muhammad Sallallahu visited the grave of Amina, visiting the graves was not allowed for Muslims. And after this permission was sought by Muhammad Sallallahu to visit the grave of his mother, and Muhammad Sallallahu allowed the Muslims to visit the graves so that they are mindful of death. Right? So he also gave the reason for why he asked Allah to visit the grave, so that it makes the Muslims mindful of death. So since then, because because of the death of Amina, and because Muhammad Sallallahu expressed a desire to visit the grave of Amina, so Allah gave the permission to Muhammad Sallallahu and his subsequent followers to visit the graves only so that they can remember the death, their impending death, and they can prepare for it. Okay, and then immediately 2 years afterwards, when he was 6, so 2 years afterwards, we don't have many details in those 2 years, but he was entrusted to Abdul Muttalib, his grandfather, and his grandfather held him in high esteem, and he loved him more than his sons, more than his other grandsons and granddaughters. And Abdul Muttalib held him in very high esteem, and he was very beloved. But then Abdul Muttalib also died when he was about 8. Abdul Muttalib was very old man. He was in his 80s, so he was already frail. So he died when Muhammad was about 8 years old. So both of his parents were no more, and Abdul Muttalib was no more as well. So as you can see, that tragedy after tragedy struck Muhammad when he was a very small child. His father died, his mother died, and then after his mother died, his grandfather, who was the legend, who was known all over Arabia, who was respected all over Arabia, he died as well. And then after Abdul Muttalib was died, he was basically entrusted to Abu Talib, who was the full brother of Abdullah. Right? Since he was the full brother of Abdullah, therefore he took the custody of Muhammad and he became his guardian. And then another incident that is reported, the next big incident that is reported during the time of Muhammad is Harbul Fijar. Harbul Fijar, Harb, as you know, Harb means war. Right? So Fijar, wars. So Fijar wars was an incident that took place when Muhammad was about 14 or 15 years old. So 14 or 15, just like we have 18 or 21, some places 18, some places 21. So 14 or 15 at that time was about 18 or 21 in our age, right, for men. So during the age of 15, men would start fighting. Okay, before 15, they would still be considered boys and they would not fight. Okay, so Muhammad was about 14 and 15, so he was still in that boy category, so he was not allowed to fight in this particular war. But this particular war happened, and this gave him valuable experience of combat. Okay, and what happens during combat, and basically it gave him experience on how to manage a combat and how to put an end to a combat as well, right? Because this war ended after 4 years. So Harbul Fijar was a war that happened. So basically there were two tribes, right? As we mentioned, as I mentioned in the last lecture, that Muhammad Sallallahu, his lineage goes all the way back to Ismail, and then to Ismail alayhi salam, and then Adnan, and then from Adnan there are 20 generations between Adnan and Muhammad Sallallahu, right? And in between them there was a very famous person by the name of Kinana, and Kinana's grandson or great grandson was Fair, who was Quraysh, right? So Quraysh is Banu Kinana was a master tribe of Quraysh, right? So Quraysh is a sub tribe of Banu Kinana. And then there was another big tribe which rivaled Kinana, and the name of that tribe was Qais Ailam. So Qais Ailam, Hawazin tribe, Thaqif tribe, Ghattafan tribe, they belong to Qais Ailam, right? Whereas Kinana, the Quraysh, belong to Kinana, and other tribes as well, they belong to Banu Kinana. So it happened that during Souk Ukaz, right? So Souk is a market. So the biggest market in Arabia at that time, in which the buying and selling of goods was done, was in this particular souk called Souk Ukaz, and it was done during the month of Dhul Qada, right? So just before the Hajj season, just before the Hajj was in Hijjah, and in Dhul Qada, so this souk, this marketplace would be set up, and this was the biggest marketplace in pre-Islamic Arabia, Souk, right? So in this souk, there was a dispute between a person from Kinana and from Qais Ailan, and the person from that person from Kinana, he killed a person from Kaisalan. And then what happened? When he killed a person from Kaisalan, then people from Kaisalan, Hawazin tribe, the Hawazin tribe chiefly primarily, they they wanted revenge for the person who was killed. So they followed the Banu Kinana, and that included Quraysh as well, and they attacked them inside the Haram. Right? So, and that is the reason why it is called Harbul Fijar. Fijar means evil. So evil war. Evil why? Because the sanctity of the Haram was breached, and as you know, that the sacred months, that the 4 sacred months that were there pre-Islam and then post-Islam as well, Zulqa'dah is one of those 4 sacred months. So Zulqa'dah, Zulhijjah, Muharram, and then Rajab, right? So these are the 4 sacred months that are there in Islam as well, that are present in Islam as well. Pre-Islam, they were also the 4 sacred months. They belong to the Sharia of Ismail alayhi salam and Ibrahim alayhi salam, right? So uh, the Qais Elan, Banu Qais Elan, they not only attacked inside the Haram, but they also reached the sanctity of this holy months, right? And they attacked the Banu Kinana during the holy months, and therefore there was a war that took place between Banu Kinana and Quraysh was amongst them, and Qais Elan. And this war was called Harb ul-Fijar. And the participation of Muhammad Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam, as I just discussed, that he was young and he was not allowed to fight. So the participation of Muhammad Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam was very minimal at that time, and he basically used to pick up the arrows and used to give it to the uncles so that the uncles are going to throw the arrows back at Qais Elan. And then it continued, this particular war continued for 3 to 4 years, and then after 4 years, after after Hawazin victories, and then later on Quraysh also had a few victories, then there was an arbitration between them, and this war was brought to an end. And Harbul Fijar. So Muhammad Sallam did not physically participate in that war because he was underage, but he did participate in the sense that he used to pick up the arrows and give it back to his uncle, and he witnessed the war firsthand as well. So, and then another important incident that took place during the life of Muhammad Sallam when he was a young adult, about early 20s or exactly 20. Some books of Seerah say exactly 20. It is called Hilful Hudud. So in this particular incident, what happened was that a Yemeni man from the Zubayd tribe, a Zubaydi, as I've mentioned it here in my slides, a Zubaydi man. Right? So Zubaydi man means his name was not Zubaydi, but he was from the tribe of Zubayd from Yemen. Okay, so he came to Mecca for pilgrimage, and then he sold a few things to Az bin Wail. Az bin Wail was also the father of Amr bin As and Hisham bin As. Amr bin As was a Sahabi, so we will discuss Amr bin As later as well. So Amr bin As was a prominent Sahabi, and Hisham bin As was also a Sahabi, right? And he was the father. Az bin Wail was one of the chieftains of Makkah, and he was the father of Amr bin As and Hisham bin As. Right? And he was one of the enemies of Islam at that time. So if you guys read Surah Al-Kawthar, so inna atoinaka al-kawthar fasalli li rabbika wanhar inna shanika huwal abtar. So in the third verse, Allah is mentioning that the ones who oppose you are the ones who are going to get cut off, right? So the mention is that of Az bin Wail, because Az bin Wail, when the child of Muhammad Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam, Abdullah, the second child of Muhammad Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam, he died. So then Az bin Wail, he rejoiced, right? And then he rejoiced in the street of Makkah, and then he said that Muhammad Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam is cut off, and that deeply pained Muhammad Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam, and therefore Allah revealed this particular surah, the Surah Kawthar. Inna a'tainaka bismillahir rahmanir rahim. Inna a'tainaka al-kawthar fasalli li rabbika wanhar inna shanika huwal abtar. So in this particular verse, the reference of the ones who are going to be cut off, the references towards Az bin Wail and the people of Quraysh who were rejoicing on the death of son of Muhammad Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam. Okay? So Az bin Wail is the same Az bin Wail. So Az bin Wail basically took a few of the merchandise from a Zubaydi man, and then he then he told him that he's going to pay him later. And then this Zubaydi man accepted it because Az bin Wail was a chieftain, so he accepted it. And then Az bin Wail stalled it. He was not paying the Zubaydi man, and then until the man realized that Az bin Wail has no intention to pay him back. So at that time, as we just said, that it was a Jahiliyyah society, and it was the tribe used to protect each other, right? Even if it went against the law, the tribe would go against the law to protect their own tribesmen. Okay, no, the law was not there, but it went against the moral code, the general moral code which was there. But even if it went against it, usually the tribe would side with their own tribesmen and go against the honor, go against the morality which was prevalent even at that time, and they would protect their own tribesmen, and therefore that particular era was called the era of Jahiliyyah. So this Zubaydi man was without his own tribe. His tribe was in Yemen, right? And As bin Wail was a chieftain of Mecca, so he went to different chieftains from Banu Hashim to other different tribes, Banu Makhzum. He went to different chieftains of Mecca and he asked them for justice. And they refused because they would not go against As bin Wail. So what he did was that he wrote an impromptu poem like that, and he started basically uh, telling the people of Quraysh about the ordeal that he was suffering because of the injustice that he suffered at the hands of the custodians of Kaaba. And he said that in his poem, he said, "You are not the custodians of Kaaba. You are just cheat, right? You people cheat us. You are not the custodians of Kaaba." So this basically struck a chord amongst the heart of some Qurayshi people, especially Zubair ibn Abdul Muttalib, right? Zubair ibn Abdul Muttalib was the uncle of Muhammad Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam. So he was the one who basically started, he said that we have to do something about it. And therefore the many chieftains of Makkah, they gathered in the house of Abdullah bin Judan. And when they gathered in the house of Abdullah bin Judan, they came up with this contract, this particular this not a contract. They came up with this pact, and this pact stated that they are going to stand with the oppressed against the oppressor, no matter the tribal affiliation of the oppressor, right? So they basically made a very just, a very Islamic, you can say Islamic in the sense that Islam stands for justice. So this was a very just pact, and that pact included that they are going to stand for the oppressed against the oppressor, regardless of the tribal affiliation of the oppressor. And then they dipped their thumbs in the perfume, and they stamped that particular pact with the perfume, right, as a signature. So that was the signature of that time. They dipped their hands in the perfume and they stamped that pact with the perfume, and they announced it in the Kaaba. Right? And then the Zubaydi man got his share back from As bin Wail. And this particular Hilful Fudul, Muhammad Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam was the youngest witness of this Hilful Fudul, and he recalled it fondly during his later years as well. And he said that certainly, as you can see here, certainly I had witnessed a pact of justice in the house of Abdullah bin Judan that was more beloved to me than a herd of red camels. So Muhammad Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam liked this particular Hilful Fudul very much. This particular pact, he liked it a lot. If I were to call to it now in the time of Islam, I would respond. So he liked it so much that he was willing to abide by it when Islam was prevailing. And he said that this particular pact is very Islamic because it stands for justice. Okay? So this Hilful Fudul was named Fudul because Fudul, there are different opinions. So it is said that it is Hilf is the pact. Hilful Fudul. Fudul means from Fadl, so a virtuous pact, right? So from Fadl means virtue, so virtuous pact. And there are other theories as well. So the other theory states that when this particular Hilf was told to As bin Wail, so he said, what is this fudul, right? So in Urdu, as we say, if you guys are familiar with Urdu, in Urdu we say fudul, right? So this talk is fuzul. This is none of your business. So similarly, As bin Wail said that this is fudul. This is none of these people's business. Why are they getting involved into it, right? So that's from there as well. This got named into Hilful Fudul. So there are competing theories as to why it is called fudul. But what the people agree on that this is called Hilful Fudul in the pact, and this was basically a contract. This was not a contract, a pact which sided the oppressed, which vowed to side for the oppressed against the oppressor. And this was very much liked by Muhammad Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam. And then finally, the early job of Muhammad Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam was that of a shepherd. So as you guys know, if you guys have heard the Qasrul Anbiya, the stories of the prophets, many of the prophets of Allah, if not all of the prophets of Allah, as Muhammad Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam mentioned here in this hadith, that all messengers sent by Allah have been shepherds of sheep. So Muhammad Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam also worked as a shepherd. He used to rear the flock of sheep, and then he used to take them to the nearby mountains, and then they would eat, and then he would take care of them, and then he would come back. And then later I'm going to ask you guys why it is important for a prophet to be a shepherd. So later at the end in the Q&A section, I will ask one of you, so why is it important for a prophet to be a shepherd? So be ready. So, and the Muhammad Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam worked as a shepherd when he was young. So it was a very low paying job, but he was semi-independent in the sense that he would earn his own money, and then he would work hard, and he would look after the sheep, and then he would look after the sheep of different people of Makkah. He would let them graze, and then he would protect them, and he would bring it back to Makkah, and he would get a small amount of money for that. Okay, so this was the early job, and this was the job which all the messengers of Allah, according to Muhammad Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam, did before they were messengers, prophets and messengers. Okay, so the next major incident that took place during the life of Muhammad Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam before the prophethood was marriage to Khadija. And this was the major incident. This was the first marriage of Muhammad Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam. And the story goes by, many of you might have heard tidbits of story as well, so I'm going to just reiterate it. So, so Muhammad Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam, we just mentioned in the previous slide that Muhammad Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam was a shepherd. So the sister of Khadija, some people say her name was Hala. So the sister of Khadija, some books say that her name was Hala. So the sister of Khadija had a flock of sheep. So she wanted Muhammad Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam to look after the flock of sheep as well. So she assigned it to Muhammad Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam and one other man, and then they took and they looked after the sheep. They brought them back, and then when Muhammad Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam was wanted to take the money, so he asked the other one of his colleagues, which was there, was tending the sheep with him as well. So he asked him to go and to get the money from the sister of Khadija, right? Because he was so shy to take the money from a woman, right? So he was very shy, so he would not go there by himself, and he would ask his colleague to go there and to take the money. Okay, so when Hala, the sister of Khadija, when she heard of it, so she praised Muhammad Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam in front of Khadija, and she said that he's a very honorable man, he's a very noble man, he's very chivalrous. So there's nobody like him in all of Makkah. He's very truthful, he's trustworthy. So when she uh, praised Muhammad Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam like this, so Khadija, who was a rich businesswoman, she had a lot of money at that time. She was the richest woman in Makkah at that time, and she used to conduct her business by entering into a mudaraba contract. Right? So mudaraba is basically profit sharing. So uh, she would hire a man to do conduct her business for her, right? And the man would go in the Roman Empire, maybe in the city of Bosra, and then he would conduct the business for Khadija, and then the profit, whatever the profit would come, they would share, right, according to the percentage that was agreed upon previously. But then Khadija knew that the men were cheating. Were cheating. They were not providing the real sum to her. They were hiding the profits that were made, and they were getting the lion's share, and they would give her a meager amount, not that much, right? So she was not making as much as she deserved. Okay, so as much as she was investing, she was not making it, and she knew it. So therefore, she wanted someone who was trustworthy, even though Muhammad Sallam was not experienced. He was inexperienced. He was a shepherd, but he wanted someone who would be trustworthy and would give her the fair share, regardless of the profit. Right? So even if the profit is less, or even if there is a loss, but someone who's going to tell the truth and is going to give her the fair share. So she wanted that. So she hired Muhammad Sallam because she heard of the honesty from her sister. So she hired Muhammad Sallam to conduct the business. And then Muhammad Sallam asked Abu Talib, he got the approval, and then he went and he conducted the business on behalf of Khadija, and he got a lot of profit from that. And then he gave 50% as that was agreed to Khadija. He gave it to Khadija, and Khadija was very impressed by her honesty and trustworthiness, and she uh, basically expressed her interest to one of her friends that she wanted to. She was an eligible. Muhammad Sallam was an eligible bachelor, and Khadija was married twice, and her husband died. Her previous husband died, so she was also not married. So she expressed her interest to marry Muhammad Sallam, and then the friend of Khadija went to Muhammad Sallam, and then she proposed on behalf of Khadija, and then Muhammad Sallam talked to his uncles, and this proposal was accepted. And then Muhammad Sallam and Khadija, they married when Muhammad Sallam was about 25 years old. And the age of Khadija is disputed. Many people say it was 40 years old, but and in the books as well that we read when we were young, we were told that Khadija was 40 and Muhammad Sallam was 25. Right? But upon if you look at the books, many of the books, they also state the age of Khadija as 28. And given the fact that Khadija had 6 children with Muhammad Sallam, right, Qasim, at least 6 children, Qasim, Zainab, Ruqayya, Kulthum, Fatima, and Abdullah, right? So at least 6 children. So it is a little bit difficult, and medically as well, right? So not difficult, but medically uh, it is much easier because the age of 28 that is given. So there's an age of 40 that is given, and another age of 28 that is given in the books. Right? So the age of 28 seems more plausible from a scientific perspective, and also from the chain of narrators which tell the age of 28 is stronger than the chain of narrators which tell the age of 40. Right? So from that perspective as well, from a historical perspective, the age of 28 is more reliable compared to the age of 40. And from a scientific perspective as well, as if you look in the sense that Khadija has 6 children, after 40 it is highly unlikely. Right? So if she was 28, then up until 40 she was having children, and she had 6 children. So that is very likely, and this is what this is what the books of Seerah mention, that she was either 28 or 40, but the 28 age seems more plausible. Okay, and Khadija, we do not have to mention the blessings of Khadija. She was the first to accept Islam. She was the one who comforted the Muhammad, comforted Prophet Muhammad whenever he was, when the first revelation came and the second revelation came, and then afterwards, whenever he was suffering from setbacks, she always comforted. She was a very intelligent woman, right? And then she was also a blessed woman, one of the four blessed women who was granted Jannah, right? Muhammad said that the best of women among the people of paradise are Khadija, Fatima, and Maryam bint Imran, and Asiya bint Zahra. Asiya was the wife of Pharaoh. So she was amongst the best women, and she was according to Muhammad, she was the best wife of Muhammad. Right? Aisha was very much jealous of her. So as we know from the reports that Aisha said that I never felt so jealous about any woman as I did for Khadija. Why? Because Muhammad would praise the the intelligence, and also the wisdom of Khadija. And she supported Muhammad whenever Muhammad was in trouble. So Allah blessed Muhammad with a loving and caring wife, Khadija, and she was the one who stood by him like a rock when he was going through all the trials and tribulations of prophethood. Okay, and then another very significant event that happened during the time of Muhammad before the prophethood was the rebuilding of Kaaba. So Kaaba, as I also mentioned in the previous classes, in the previous lecture as well, that Kaaba was a holy sanctuary even before Islam. Right? So it was established as a sanctuary by Ismail and Ibrahim, and the Meccans and the Arabs used to consider it as a very holy sanctuary, as a haram, even pre-Islam. Okay, and then used to come to Kaaba and they used to perform the Hajj. As I mentioned, the Hajj was constituted by Ibrahim alayhi salam and also Ismail alayhi salam. So they used to follow the religion of Ibrahim and Ismail, but then they changed it and they included idolatry. They borrowed idols from neighboring civilizations, neighboring seemingly superior civilizations, and then they borrowed the idols, they kept it in Makkah, and that is how they started worshipping idols instead of worshipping one God as Ibrahim and Ismail taught them. Okay, so Kaaba was a holy sanctuary. So what happened was that fire and flood when Muhammad was about 35 years old. So there was a fire that happened. So a woman was cooking, and the fire lit up the fire went out of her house, and then it lit up the ghilaf, the covering of the Kaaba, and then Kaaba was on fire, and then this damaged the Kaaba, and then as we know as well, Kaaba is a Makkah is in a low-lying area, right? So if the flood happens in the neighboring areas, if there's a lot of rain, then the uh, water is going to come to Makkah, and this is exactly what happened. There was a lot of rain on the outskirts of Makkah, and the water came all the way to the Kaaba, and there was a flood, and it destroyed the Kaaba. It did not destroy it, but it damaged the Kaaba by a significant amount. So the Quraysh, since they were the custodians of Kaaba, so they wanted to rebuild the Kaaba because it had been damaged by a large extent. So they decided to rebuild the Kaaba, and then when they were deciding to rebuild the Kaaba, they heard the news that a ship has landed in Jeddah. Right. So previously it was called Jeddah, now it is called Jeddah. So it is on the Red Sea. So the Roman Empire used to go all the way down from Red Sea. So if the Romans wanted to come to Arabia, so they used to come through the Red Sea. Right? So the sea between Sham or Syria, modern day Palestine, right, and Arabia is the Red Sea. So that sea, the Roman emperor at that time, the Caesar of Rome, wanted to build a church, right, and wanted to build a church in Yemen. So he sent a lot of raw materials, a lot of very expensive raw materials onto the Red Sea, onto a ship, onto the Red Sea, so that they can be carried to Yemen and the church is built. And that church was destroyed by the Persians. We'll discuss about the wars between the Romans and the Persians. So this particular raw material, which was going in the ship near the shores of Jeddah, it got caught in a wind, it got caught in a storm, so it landed on Jeddah. At that time it was called Jeddah, now it is called Jeddah. So the Quraysh, they heard of it, and the Romans at that time, they wanted to sell it because they wanted to go back. They were trapped they were trapped, and the ship landed there, and they were trapped. They could not go back, so they wanted to go back to Rome. Before going back to the Rome, they wanted to sell all of the raw materials that were present. So the Quraysh, when they heard of it, and they decided to collect the money, so that they could purchase it and they could build a Kaaba out of the expensive material from Rome instead of the material from the local cheap material from Arabia, right? And the Rome was known for its magnificence, so they wanted to build a Kaaba, a magnificent. They wanted to build a structure. They wanted to build Kaaba, which was basically from building which was based primarily on Arab architecture and Arab raw materials to the magnificent Roman architecture and Roman materials. Okay? So they went there to Jeddah and they purchased the raw material, and they also hired one of the craftsmen of Rome, right, who was there at that time. They hired him because they wanted to know how to use these raw materials, right? They wanted to know how to construct the building using these raw materials. So they hired him and they brought him to Makkah. Okay? And then there are four walls of Makkah. Sorry, there are four walls of Kaaba. There are four walls. It was rectangular in shape. Back in the days, it was rectangular in shape. So there were four walls. So the two prestigious walls were given to Banu Makhzum and Banu Abd Manaf. Right? So if you remember the lineage of Muhammad Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam, you should remember up until Qusay. Right? So Muhammad Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam bin Abdullah bin Abdul Muttalib bin Hashim bin Abd Manaf bin Qusay. Okay, so Abd Manaf is the father of Hashim. So Banu Abd Manaf, so the Quraysh were divided into sub-tribes again. Okay, and Banu Abd Manaf was given the most prestigious wall, and Banu Makhzum was given the second most prestigious wall, right? So, and the black stone was directly in between the wall that was given to Banu Makhzum and Banu Abd Manaf. Okay, so now when they started, before starting the construction of the wall, they were scared to tear down because they had to tear down the walls, right? So the walls that had been damaged, they had to first tear them down and then rebuild the Kaaba. So they were scared. But then Walid bin Mughira, who was one of the chieftains of Makkah, he said, "Okay, I'm going to go and I'm going to tear down one of the walls." Okay, so he decided to go there and tear it down. And then when he started hammering the wall, and then nothing happened to him, then people were like, okay, then nothing is going to happen to us as well. So they started tearing down the walls of Kaaba, and then they started rebuilding the Kaaba. And then the construction of the Kaaba was fairly smooth up until the time to carry the black stone and to place it in the place. Up until that time, the construction was very smooth. But then when the time came to place the black stone in its place between the two walls that were given to Banu Makhzum and Banu Abd Manaf, there was a fight. Okay, so Banu Abd Manaf wanted the honors and Banu Makhzum wanted the honors. Okay? And then after that, when there was a fight, not a physical fight, but a verbal fight, right? So each of them wanted the honor to put the stone. These two tribes wanted the honor to put the stone in the place in the Kaaba, right? And they were not budging. Each of the tribes was not budging. They wanted the honor themselves. So from the Banu Makhzum tribe, there was the brother of Walid bin Mughira. His name was Abu Umayyah bin Mughira. After things were getting heated and the daggers were almost drawn and there was fear of bloodshed, so Abu Umayyah bin Mughira, he suggested that the first person who's going to enter the sanctuary is going to be the one who's going to choose who's going to keep the black stone. Okay, so the first person who entered happened to be Muhammad Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam, and everybody was happy because Muhammad Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam was considered to be, even though it was a very highly tribalistic society, tribalism was prevalent. So Muhammad Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam was considered someone who was friendly with everyone, right? So everyone was very happy when Muhammad Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam came. So Muhammad Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam, basically he used his wisdom, and what he did was he asked the people to bring a piece of cloth, and then he placed the black stone on that piece of cloth, and then he asked all the chieftains of the tribes to come and pick the piece of cloth in which the black stone is there, and then they picked it up, and then when it was at the level of where it had to be placed, then Muhammad picked it up and placed the black stone inside the place it was there in the Kaaba, right? So in this way, his wisdom averted an impending disaster. Right? Otherwise, there would have been bloodshed in the Kaaba, in the holy sanctuary. So his wisdom and his impromptu wisdom, right? He had to think in that particular situation. So his impromptu wisdom was the one that prevented bloodshed in the holy sanctuary. Okay, and this is one of the major incidents that took place before the Prophet Muhammad Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam, when Prophet Muhammad Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam was about 35 years old. And there were some changes. So this is very important to note that the Quraysh, they made some changes to the structure of the Kaaba. Okay? So the Kaaba before was rectangular in shape, but the Quraysh, since they were running out of the raw materials, so they made it cubical in shape. Right? Rectangular means cuboid. So previously it was cuboid like this, whereas they made it cubical because they were running out of raw materials. And then they made the door a bit high. The door previously was down, so they made it a bit high so that only the elite of the Quraysh would go inside the Kaaba. So they made it a bit high. And they also increased the height of the Kaaba. So they made it uh, instead of cuboid, they made it cubical. They increased the height, and they also increased the height at which the door was there, so that only the elite could go inside the Kaaba. So these three changes were made, and there were a few other changes as well. But these three main changes were made to the structure of Kaaba, and then these changes are also present to this day as well. So if you look at the structure of Kaaba, it is cubical in shape, largely cubical in shape, and then this is the place that you have in which the Kaaba was there before. But then, since the Quraysh did not have raw materials, this space was the Kaaba was not built in this place. Right? This place is called Hijr or Hatim. So you can go and pray inside this as well. So this is if you go inside, if you go here inside Hatim and pray, you are going to get the thawab, you are going to get the reward of praying inside the Kaaba. Right? So this is one of the wisdoms of Allah, that He left this place for the public to go there and to pray, and they would get the same reward as they are praying inside the Kaaba. Otherwise, it would have been otherwise only the elites would go inside the Kaaba and pray. Okay, and the structure remains the same, very similar to this day as well. Okay, but it was torn down in the middle, and then a few things happened. Maybe someone can ask me in the Q&A. There's a very interesting history of Kaaba. So a few things happened. There was a civil war, a few things happened, and then the structure of the Kaaba changed for a while in the middle, but then it was brought back, right? So if any one of you is interested as to what happened with the structure of Kaaba, why did someone change the structure of Kaaba? Why was it brought back to this original, not original, why was it brought back to this structure? So just ask me in Q&A. Okay, right now, I don't think we have to rush a little bit, but in the Q&A, you can ask me why the structure of Kaaba was changed later, who changed it, and who changed it back. Very interesting and very tragic as well. And another important incident that took place was the incident that involved Zayd bin Harith. Right? So Zayd bin Harith was a free child. He was born to a free woman and a free man. But then when he was staying with his mother, so there was a tribe that was at war with the tribe of his mother. Okay, and then that tribe attacked the tribe of his mother and then captured Zayd, and then they sold Zayd in the market, in the Souk Ukaz, right? Souk Ukaz we already discussed before. This was the largest market that was there in the pre-Islamic Arabia. Okay? And then it was still stayed as a market in post-Islamic Arabia as well, but then it lost its importance because the Muslims conquered the Persia and Rome, right? The parts of Roman Empire, almost all of the Persian Empire. So they had the access to Silk Road and they had access to much larger markets. So therefore, the importance of Souk Ukaz is basically reduced up until it was destroyed completely by the Kharijites during the time of the Umayyads, right? If I'm not mistaken, 726 AD, Souk Ukaz was destroyed by the Kharijites, and then relatively recently, about 60, 70 or 80 years ago, because it disappeared, right? Nobody knew where it was, but then 60, 70 years ago, it was discovered again by some of the archaeologists, and now you have another souk, another marketplace, which is there at the time of the original Souk Ukaz, right? So in this same Souk Ukaz, the Zayd bin Harith was kidnapped and he was sold here to Hakim bin Hizam. Hakim bin Hizam was the nephew of Khadija. So he gave it to Khadija, and then Khadija, when she married to Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, she gifted Zayd to Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. And then the father of Zayd, he got very angry, and he got very angry. He wanted to bring Zayd back, right? So he started a search for Zayd. So where did Zayd go? He started a search for Zayd, and one of the tribesmen that belonged to the tribe of the father of Zayd. So when he went to Makkah for pilgrimage, so he recognized that Zayd is from our tribe. He was not from the tribe of Quraysh. And then he asked who owns this particular slave, right? Because he was slave boy, so he asked who owns this particular slave boy, and then he was told that it is the grandson of Abdul Muttalib, named Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, who owns this particular slave boy, right? And he went back. He told Zayd's father that your son is there in Makkah, and he's there with the grandson of Abdul Muttalib. Everyone knew Abdul Muttalib, so Zayd's father became happy. He took his brother with him, and then he took a lot of money with him, and then he went to Makkah. He met Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, and then after meeting Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, he told him that, okay, so this is my son. He was captured, he was kidnapped, and then he was sold to you. So why don't you give him back, and then we'll pay you some money, right? And please don't charge us much because we are not very, very rich, right? You are a noble person, so you do not charge us much, but if whatever suitable sum you are going to ask us to give, we'll give it. Just give us our son back. So Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam said that it is up to Zayd. If he wants to stay with me, I cannot force him to go with you, and if he wants to go with you, you can take him without any charge. And then Zayd bin Harith, he recognized his father, he recognized his uncle, But then he said that I'm not going to prefer anyone over Muhammad Sallam, be it my father or my uncle. Okay, and then his father and his uncle, they were shocked as to how Zayd can live as a slave rather than living as a free man in the protection of his tribe under his father, under his uncle, under his mother. So they were shocked as to how is this possible. But Zayd, when he looked at the conduct that the Muhammad Sallam had with him, and it was and his he came to a conclusion that Muhammad Sallam is the best man and that he's not going to change him for anyone on earth, be it his father, his mother, right? So this was a relationship that father and I mean a very strong relationship that Zayd bin Haris had with Muhammad Sallam, a relationship that was based on love, based on mutual respect. That Zayd bin Haris preferred Muhammad Sallam even to his mother and his father and to his uncle and his own tribesmen. Okay, so Muhammad Sallam at that time basically lifted his hand in the Kaaba and he announced that he's now going to adopt Zayd bin Haris, and then Zayd bin Haris then became, from that point onwards, he became Zayd bin Muhammad up until the Medina times when Surah Ahzab was revealed, and it was revealed by Allah revealed that Allah commanded basically to call the children by the name of their fathers. Right? So this type of adoption, in which the child would change his name to the name of the father who adopted him, this type of adoption was then ruled out in Islam. Right? So in Islam, there is no more such adoption in which the child can take the name of his father. The child always has to take the child can take the name of the father who adopted him. The child always has to take the name of the real biological father in Islam, right? Since the verse of Surah Ahzab. But before Surah Ahzab was revealed, everyone knew Zayd bin Haris as Zayd bin Muhammad. And Zayd bin Haris was a famous companion. We are going to discuss about Zayd bin Haris later as well. And he was married to Ayman. So if you guys know Ayman from Ayman from the death of the mother, right? So this particular slide, I told you that I'm going to discuss about Ayman later, right? So Amina had a servant named Ayman, and Amina had a servant named Ayman, and Muhammad Sallam visited Yathrib with Ayman and Amina. Okay, and it is the same Ayman that married to Zayd bin Harith. And Zayd bin Harith married Ayman, and they had a son, and the name of the son was Uthman bin Zayd. Uthman bin Zayd. And Uthman bin Zayd bin Haris was the leader. There was basically the last expedition that Muhammad Sallam wanted to send to the Roman Empire to avenge the death of his father, Zayd bin Haris. If you guys remember, I discussed it during the lecture during the second last lecture, right, which was the first lecture regarding the rightly guided caliphs, right? When I discussed about Abu Bakr, the first thing that he did was he sent the expedition of Usama bin Zayd to the Roman Empire. Right? So Usama bin Zayd is the son of Zayd bin Harith from Ayman. Okay. We'll discuss later about the Zayd bin Haris later when we talk about battles and some of the famous incidences that happened during the lifetime of Muhammad. Okay, now we are done. This is all the information that we have pre-revelation. So now post-revelation, post before the first revelation, just before the first revelation. So Muhammad Sallam, he developed a habit of secluding himself, going into seclusion in the cave of Hira. So this is the this is the image of the cave of Hira. So Muhammad Sallam, what he did was that he used to seclude himself for days in the cave of Hira. He used to take food from Khadija, and then he used to go to the cave of Hira, and then he used to seclude himself. He used to ponder, and then he used to come back. He used to come back to Khadija, and then he used to take again some more food, and then he used to go back to Hira, and he used to live a life of seclusion in the cave. And then in the cave, what happened just before the revelation, there was about 6 months before the revelation. 6 months before the revelation. So what happened was that he began to see dreams which used to come true. Right? So he used to see a dream, and then he would come true the next day, and then he used to see a dream on that day that would come true the next day, and so on. Right? So this would continue happening, and this was very strange. Right? And then he went to Khadija, and then he told her that I'm seeing dreams which are coming true. Right? So Khadija basically told him not to worry. Right? And then Khadija comforted him as always, and she told him not to worry. So now, when he used to go to seclusion in the cave of Hira, so one day what happened was that there was a light in the cave of Hira. It is said that it was the day of Saturday, there was a light, but then nothing happened. Right? And then on the day of Sunday, there was a light again, and then nothing happened. Okay. And then when he went back on the day of Monday, there was a light again, and then at this time, an angel entered, and that we now know is the angel Jibril. But at that time, Muhammad knew what thing came inside the cave. Right. So light came, and then angel Jibril entered, and then he came to Muhammad Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam and he asked him to read, right? Iqra, if you guys know the story of the first revelation. So Angel Jibreel came, he entered upon, and then he told Muhammad Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam to read Iqra. Right? So Muhammad Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam said, "Man, biqari, I don't know how to read." So Muhammad Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam, as you guys know as well, so Muhammad Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam did not knew how to read or write. Okay, so Muhammad Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam told Jibreel, Angel Jibreel, "Man, biqari, I don't know how to read." So Angel Jibreel, he hugged him and he squeezed him very tight, so much so that he could not breathe. Right? So it was so tight that he felt that his ribs were crushing and he could not breathe. And then afterwards, he let him go, and then he asked him to read again, Iqra. And then Muhammad Sallam again said, "Man, Bukhari, I don't know how to read." So then again, Angel Jibreel squeezed him once again, and then he let him go, and then he told him Iqra the third time, right? And then he said, "Man, Bukhari, I don't know how to read," the third time, and then Angel Jibreel again squeezed him. Okay, so all of this incident is present in one of the hadith of Sahih Bukhari, the third hadith of Sahih Bukhari. If you are going to open Sahih Bukhari, the third hadith is regarding the divine inspiration, the first revelation. Okay, so he hugged him for the third time, and then afterwards, when he let him go, then Angel Jibreel basically gave the first 5 verses of Surah Alaq. So if you guys know, Iqra bismi rabbika allati khalaq, خلق الإنسان من علق, اقرأ وربك الأكرم الذي علم بالقلم علم الإنسان ما لم يعلم. اقرأ باسم ربك الذي خلق. Read in the name of your Lord who created. خلق الإنسان من علق, created man from clinging thing, right? So some people say that this is the reference to embryo, right? اقرأ وربك الأكرم, your Lord is more generous. Read, your Lord is more generous. الذي علم بالقلم, right? So he taught with pen, right? علم الإنسان ما لم يعلم, taught men that which he knew not, right? So in the first revelation, as you guys can see, the importance of knowledge, right? As we just discussed in the last lecture as well, that the Muslim civilization, it was so magnificent because it was based upon the preservation and the enhancement of knowledge. The Muslim was the most knowledgeable people for about 1,000 years, so therefore they excelled in the knowledge, the sciences of theology, in the science of hadith, in physical sciences as well, in logic, in any field that you can name of social sciences, the Muslims excelled in it, right? Why? Because the Muslim civilization was based upon this uh, the particular base that the Quran gave them, which was the pursuit of knowledge, right? And the pursuit of knowledge was personified by the first revelation. Iqra, read or recite in the name of your Lord who created and who taught men with pen, right? So, and this is very significant as well. Right? So, if you look at a few people these days, so they profess themselves as atheists, and they say that we just came out of an accident, right? So, if you just think about it, if you think about the language that we speak, right? The fact that I'm able to converse with you and you are able to understand me, this is a miracle in and of itself, right? So if you guys look at the animals, they are only able to make a few sounds and they are able to understand those sounds, but they're very, very limited. But human beings, we have complex languages in which we can communicate complex ideas to each other. And not just we can communicate complex ideas to each other, we can write them down, right? So we can, what is in our mind, we can write it down physically on a paper or whatever, right? On a laptop or whatever, right? So we can write it down physically. So this is a miracle, right? This cannot happen through randomness. Randomly these things happen, that human beings just from murmuring from monkeys, right? So basically they were murmuring. They were not. They were just. They were like animals, and then suddenly they start to speak, right? So this does not happen, and we know from experiments as well that human beings, they can learn a language up to a certain age, about 12 or 13 years old. But then after that particular age, they will never learn a language. So if you are going to isolate a particular human being and he has never interacted with another human being and he never learns a language up until the age of 12 or 13, he'll never be able to learn a language again in his life, right? So what the atheists are trying to posit is that the human beings, they learned language and they learned how to write before the age of 12 or 13, right? Before they were even young, before like 10 years old, they taught themselves how to speak, they taught themselves how to write, which is ridiculous, right? So, and the answer is there in the Quran. The question then arises, who taught human beings how to read and how to write, right? So, and the answer is there in the Quran, in the first revelation, that it was Allah who taught human beings how to read. Allah taught Adam alayhi salam how to speak and how to read, and then Allah taught Idris alayhi salam how to write. And this is how we know how to read and write to this day, right? And then everything, therefore, every knowledge that we have, you can trace it back to Allah, right? So all the knowledge that we have to thank Allah for that knowledge, because without Allah teaching us how to read and how to write, we will never be able to know how to, by ourselves, how to read and write, and we will just like animals. Okay? So therefore, in this particular first revelation, the basis of Islam, which is the Quran basically also comes from the same root word, basically to recite, right? So the basic of Islam, upon which the Islamic civilization was based upon and ruled the world for about 1,000 years, is established. And then the story goes by this, right? So when Muhammad Sallam was inspired by the first revelation, so he went to his home. He went running to his home because he was shivering and he was pale. And then when he went to his home, he asked Khadija. He said, "Zambiluni, Zambiluni, right? Cover me." Right? And then Khadija, and then he told Khadija that something is happening to me. Right? So he was basically he was thinking that maybe he was hallucinating or maybe he was losing his sanity or something like that, right? So he was thinking like that something is happening to me because this experience was not normal. Okay, then Khadija replied, which is a famous reply, which all of you guys would have heard of it at some point. So never, by Allah, Allah will never disgrace you. You keep good relations with your kith and kin, help the poor and the destitute, serve your guests generously, and assist the deserving calamity afflicted ones. Right? So Khadija gave this response from a fitra that no, Allah is not going to do harm upon you because you do good to others. So if you do good to others, Allah is going to do good towards you. Right? So this is what Khadija told her and comforted Muhammad. Right? And then Khadija has a cousin who converted to a form of Christianity. His name was Waraqah bin Nawfal. We talked about Waraqah bin Nawfal in the previous lecture as well. So Khadija took Muhammad to Waraqah bin Nawfal, and then Waraqah bin Nawfal, uh, uh, when he heard of the story, he said that this is the same angel. This is the Namus that came to Musa. Right? Namus means the keeper of secrets, which was another name for Angel Jibreel. Right? So this is the Namus. He's the same angel that came to Musa alayhi salam, and then he told Muhammad that I wish I was a young man when your own people are going to drive you out of your home. Right? So then Muhammad was shocked. Okay, my own people are going to drive me out of Makkah, so drive me out of my home. And Waraqah said, yes, they are going to drive you out of your home because the previous prophet before you who came to a polytheistic society with a message, they were also driven out of their homes as well. Okay, and then we discussed in the previous lecture as well that Waraqah was the first male, probably the first male to believe in Muhammad, and he died as a Muslim. And Muhammad also verified in a hadith that Waraqah is in Jannah. Okay. So then after this last sentence is important. After a few days, Waraqah died. So Waraqah died after a few days, and the divine inspiration was also paused for a while. Okay. So after the first revelation, when the first 5 verses of Surah Alaq was revealed, so the divine revelation, it stopped for a while. Right? So Muhammad when he experienced this, so the divine revelation, when he experienced the first revelation, so he wanted to he wanted to know what was happening, right? He wanted to confirm whether what was happened was real or not, right? So we're still in a state of shock, as you can see, and as you guys can imagine, if something like this happens to a normal human being, he would probably die of shock, right? Muhammad was a very strong man, but he was still a man, right? So he was still in shock. He was still you can say that he was still fearful of what happened to him, right? But he still wanted to verify. He wanted to go back to Hira and he wanted to verify whether what was happening to him was real or not, or whether he was maybe hallucinating, or maybe as he was thinking about, maybe it was something that happened in his dream, or it happened for reality. Right? So he began going back to Cave Hira so that he could see that particular angel back again, Angel Jibreel, as we know, right? So he went back to Hira, but then nothing happened. Right? He went back to Hira, nothing happened. He went back for many days, right? As you can see in the previous slide, the revelation stopped for many days. And this many days is interpreted in a lot of ways. So some scholars say that this many days includes 3 years, which is a bit too much in my opinion, right? So 3 years is a lot. Some scholars say it is 2.5 years, which again is a lot. Right? And then some scholars say it is 16 days or 40 days, and there are all kinds of timelines in between, right? So let's say the timeline the time that makes the most sense is about a month to 40 days, right? So because uh, 2 years and 3 years is just a lot of time wasted. Hello, yeah.
I think Umar, we need to pause here now because it's almost time for iftar. Yeah.
Almost time for iftar. Okay, it's
Yeah.
just 2 minutes. Can you give me 2 minutes or?
Okay. Sure.
Okay, right. So then after let's say 30 or 40 days, then again the angel Jibreel came to him, right? And then Muhammad Sallam, he went back to his home, and then he saw the angel, as you can see here. I raised my head and there was the angel who had came to me in Hira, sitting on a throne between heaven and earth. Okay, and he saw the angel, and then he went back to his home, and the angel followed him to the house of Khadija. Angel Jibreel followed him to the house of Khadija. And then he asked Khadija to cover him again. Zambiluni, Zambiluni, cover me again. Right? And then after that, Angel Jibreel revealed the first 7 verses of Surah Muddathir. Okay? these first 7 verses were revealed. These first 7 verses I'm going to read, and then I'm going to translate, and then we are done with the class. Okay, we're done with this lecture, not the class. So the first 7 verses, Ya ayyuhal a'udhu billahi minash shaitanir rajim, bismillahir rahmanir rahim, Ya ayyuhal muddaththir, right? The one who is wrapped in a sheet, the one who is wrapped in a cloak. Qum fa'anzir, right? Stand up and warn. Qum fa'anzir, stand up and warn. So this, you have to stop going to Hira now. You have to stop being inside your sheet now. You have to stop being comfortable. You have to now start the da'wah. So this was basically a command from Allah to start the da'wah, to start preaching the message of Allah to His own people. Right? So this was a direct command, and this marked the start of the da'wah, which continued for 23 years. After this revelation, this marked the start of the da'wah, which continued till 23 years during the lifetime of Prophet Muhammad. Okay, وَرَبَّكَ فَكَبِّرْ. Okay, and revere your Lord, right? So whenever you are doing the da'wah, you revere your Lord. Okay, so you glorify, you revere Allah, right? وَثِيَابَكَ فَطَهِّرْ, and purify your clothes, right? So this purification is also physical purification. So whenever you are giving da'wah, so whenever you're talking to people regarding Allah, so you have to be in good attire, you have to be in good clothes, pure clothes. And this is also spiritual purification as well, right? So this is not basically, this is because Muhammad was already spiritually pure. So this ayah means that you have to continue to be spiritually pure when you are a prophet. Now you have a big responsibility, continue to be spiritually pure, right? So this is the purification of the physical as well as the spiritual clothes. Okay. وَالرُّجْزَ فَهْجُرْ, right? And stay away from what is filth. So in this particular ayah, filth means idolatry. Stay away from idolatry. Right? So continue to stay away from idolatry. So Muhammad was already away from idolatry, so continue to stay away from idolatry. وَلَا تَمْنُنْ تَسْتَكْثِرْ, right? So whenever you give something, do not expect, right? So do not give something expecting something more in return, right? So this is the basic etiquette. This forms the basic Islamic etiquette. So whenever you give something, whenever you do someone a favor, you do it for the sake of Allah, right? You do not do it so that you get something back. Okay, so this is what Allah is saying. So whenever you do someone a favor, whenever you give something to someone, right, do not do it for the sake of getting something more in return, right? Do it for the sake of Allah, right? And then finally, وَلِرَبِّكَ فَاصْبِرْ, and persevere in the path of Allah, right? And this was a heavy message that was revealed, and a heavy responsibility. So Allah gave him this advice that you have to persevere, right, in the path of Allah, right? So this is because you are going to be afflicted with lots of trials and tribulations, and you have to do sabr, you have to persevere. Okay, and this is the end of the second revelation and the start of the da'wah, which is going to continue throughout the lifetime of Prophet Muhammad, throughout the 23 years of the lifetime of Prophet Muhammad. Okay, so this is the end of the second lecture. Any questions?
Can we cover the reconstruction of the Kaaba maybe in the next session, because the time is short?
Oh, sure. How much time do we have? Do we have 2 minutes? Maybe I can give something in 2 minutes.
We have like about...
No, it's a bit short over here because
okay, sure.
we have iftar in about 20 minutes. So,
20 minutes?
Yeah, people would have to prepare iftar as well.
Yeah, sure. So it's up to you.
So inshallah, maybe we can go in a bit more detail in the next one.
Sure.
In those parts. Inshallah.
Yep. Inshallah.
All right. So we'll wrap it up over here then. Thank you so much, Umer, for your time.
No problem.
And another wonderful session. May Allah bless you more in your knowledge. And allow us all to benefit from it and implement it in our lives. Inshallah. So thank you everyone for joining. And inshallah, we'll see you all next Saturday, 5 p.m. inshallah. Assalamu alaikum.